I buried my husband's fortune the same day I buried his dreams, but the baby in my arms wasn't his. Let me tell you how a woman with everything became a woman with nothing to lose. My name is Grace, and for 7 years, I wore designer dresses that cost more than most people's cars. I lived in a house with 12 bedrooms, though only 2 of us slept there. I had a husband who owned half the city's real estate, 3 luxury cars, and a smile so fake it could crack glass. What I didn't have was the one thing his family demanded, the one thing that would make me worthy in their eyes: a son. Not just any child, a boy, an heir. Someone to carry forward the great family name of the Ben Empire. My husband David already had 2 daughters from his first marriage, beautiful girls I tried to love, who looked at me like I was a stranger renting space in their father's heart. But daughters, his mother told me on our wedding night, were just expensive decorations. The family needed a boy. I tried everything. 7 years of treatments that turned my body into a science experiment. Pills that made me sick. Injections that left bruises like dark flowers across my stomach. Doctors who spoke in numbers and percentages, never looking me in the eye when they delivered bad news. David never blamed me with words. He didn't have to. The way he stopped touching me said everything. The way he'd leave rooms when his mother visited. The way his eyes would linger on other women at parties. Younger women, women whose bodies hadn't failed them yet. His mother was worse. Mrs. Ben had the kind of cruelty that wore expensive jewelry and smiled while it cut you. A woman who cannot give her husband a son is like a tree that produces no fruit, she told me once, loud enough for the house staff to hear. Eventually, someone cuts it down. I was 34 years old, and I could feel my marriage dying one silent dinner at a time. But here's what nobody tells you about desperation. It makes you creative. The idea came to me on a Thursday afternoon. I was sitting in my favorite cafe, the one place in the city where nobody knew my last name or cared about my empty womb. A woman at the next table was showing photos of her newborn to her friend, and I couldn't stop staring. That's when I saw him through the window. His name was John, though I wouldn't learn that until later. He was loading bags of vegetables from an old truck, his shirt stained with soil and sweat. He looked nothing like the men in my world. No expensive watch, no polished shoes, no practiced charm. Just a young man who worked with his hands, who probably woke before sunrise and fell asleep too tired to dream. He was exactly what I needed. The thought came fully formed, like it had been waiting in my mind all along. If my body couldn't give David a son, someone else's could. But it had to be done carefully, quietly, in a way that would never trace back to me. It couldn't be anyone from our social circle. It couldn't be anyone who would recognize opportunity and turn it into blackmail. It had to be someone simple, someone grateful, someone who would disappear. I followed John that day, not like a stalker, more like someone gathering information, building a plan. He worked at a small vegetable farm on the edge of the city, the kind of place where city and countryside blur together into something neither. His truck was older than most of my shoes. His phone was the kind you buy with scratch cards. His entire world was small enough to fit in the back of that beaten vehicle. Perfect. I returned the next day, and the day after that. I learned his routine. Morning deliveries to restaurants, afternoon work in the fields, evening drives back to a small house he shared with his sick mother. No wife, no girlfriend that I could see. Just a young man, maybe 25, who was too busy surviving to ask questions. On the 4th day, I approached him. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice soft, vulnerable. "My car broke down a few blocks from here. Could you possibly give me a ride to the nearest repair shop?" He looked at me like I'd dropped from another planet, which, in a way, I had. My clothes probably cost more than he made in 6 months, but he nodded, wiping his hands on his jeans, and gestured to his truck. "It's not very clean," he said, almost apologizing. "I don't mind," I told him, climbing in. "I really appreciate this." That's how it started. One ride, then a conversation, then another chance meeting, this one at the same cafe, then lunch, which I insisted on buying. "You helped me," I said. "Let me thank you properly." John wasn't stupid, but he was kind, and kindness, I learned, can be its own kind of blindness. Over 3 weeks, I built something that looked like friendship. I told him my name was Grace. That much was true. I told him I was lonely in my marriage. Also true. I told him my husband traveled constantly and barely noticed me anymore. True enough. I painted myself as a victim, which wasn't entirely a lie. I just left out the part about the plan. John talked about his mother, who had diabetes and couldn't afford proper treatment. He talked about his dreams of expanding the farm, maybe hiring help so he wouldn't have to work 16-hour days. He talked like someone who'd never expected anyone to listen. I listened. I smiled. I touched his hand across the table and felt him tremble. "You're different from anyone I've ever met," he told me one evening, his eyes holding something dangerous and honest. "So are you," I said, meaning it in ways he'd never understand. The affair happened naturally after that, or at least that's what I let him believe. Secret meetings in a small apartment I rented under a false name. Afternoons when David was at the office and his mother was judging someone else. Moments that John thought were stolen but were actually purchased. I felt guilty. Of course I did. John wasn't just a means to an end. He was a person, with feelings and hopes and a gentleness that my world had forgotten existed. When he held me like I mattered. When he kissed me, it wasn't performance or obligation. Sometimes, late at night in that rented room, I'd wonder if I was the villain in this story. Then I'd go home to David's cold bed and his mother's cutting remarks, and I'd remember why I was doing this. 3 months later, I was pregnant. I timed it perfectly. David and I had one night together. I made sure of it, made sure he'd remember, made sure it would seem plausible. Then I cut things off with John, gently but firmly. "My husband knows," I told him, manufacturing tears. "Someone saw us. I can't risk this anymore. I'm so sorry." The pain in his eyes nearly broke me, but I held firm. "Will I ever see you again?" he asked. "It's better if you don't," I whispered. "Please understand." He drove away in that old truck, and I watched him go, wondering if I'd just destroyed the only honest thing in my life. But I was pregnant. That's what mattered. David was overjoyed when I told him. For the first time in years, he looked at me with something like love. His mother actually smiled. A real smile, not the razor blade kind. The family celebrated. The pressure lifted. Suddenly I was valuable again, worthy again. All because of a lie. The pregnancy was smooth. David attended every appointment, his hand in mine. He talked to my belly at night, telling his son about the business he'd inherit, the legacy waiting for him. He never once questioned if the baby was his. Why would he? I was his wife. I'd been desperate for a child for years. The timing made sense. Nobody suspected a thing. 8 months in, I saw John again. It wasn't planned. I'd gotten careless, comfortable in my deception. I was shopping at an upscale market when I turned a corner and found him stocking shelves. Our eyes met, and the world stopped. He looked at my belly, and something flickered across his face. Confusion, recognition, fear. "Grace," he said softly. "I can't talk here," I whispered, my heart hammering. "Please." He nodded slowly, and I saw the questions burning in his eyes. Questions I couldn't answer. Questions that could destroy everything. I left without buying anything, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my keys. That night, I barely slept. What if he figured it out? What if he came looking for answers? What if he told someone, anyone, about us? But weeks passed, and nothing happened. John didn't appear at my door. He didn't call the numbers I'd given him, which I'd since disconnected. He simply vanished back into the life I'd pulled him from. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt hollow. My son was born on a Tuesday morning in April. 7 pounds, healthy lungs, his father's eyes, or so everyone said. They saw what they wanted to see. David held him with tears streaming down his face. His mother declared it a miracle. The family fortune had its heir. I named him Samuel, which means asked of God. Nobody knew how true that was. For 6 months, life was perfect. David was an attentive father. The family treated me with newfound respect. Samuel was healthy, happy, growing strong. I'd done it. I'd secured my place, saved my marriage, given my husband what he desperately wanted. But guilt is a patient predator. It started small. Dreams where John's face appeared, asking questions I couldn't answer. Moments when I'd look at Samuel and see features that didn't quite match David's family. A stubborn curl in his hair, a dimple in his left cheek. Small things that probably meant nothing. Or everything. Then, 7 months after Samuel's birth, my world caught fire. I was in David's study, looking for a document he'd asked me to find when I saw the envelope. It was addressed to David, marked personal and confidential. The return address was a private investigation firm. My blood turned to ice. With shaking hands, I opened it. The report was thorough. Dated photographs of me entering and leaving that rented apartment. Records of payments I'd made. Phone records I thought I'd destroyed. And there, in clinical black and white, a statement of facts that ended with a recommendation for paternity testing. David knew. Or he was about to. I don't remember sitting down. I don't remember breathing. I only remember the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. David's car, hours earlier than expected. He found me there, holding the evidence of my betrayal. "Grace," he said quietly, and in his voice I heard the death of everything. "I can explain," I started, but he held up his hand. Can you really explain how my wife got pregnant by someone else and let me believe the child was mine? David, please." "I had my suspicions," he continued, his voice eerily calm. "Small things didn't add up, but I wanted to believe. I wanted Samuel to be mine so badly that I convinced myself I was being paranoid. So I hired investigators, and they gave me this." He took the envelope from my hands, and I saw that his were shaking too. "I've spent the last week trying to decide what to do," he said. "Divorce you? Expose you? Take Samuel from you? I could do all of that, you know. My lawyers assure me I'd win everything. David, I'm so sorry. I don't want your apologies." His eyes, when they met mine, held something I couldn't read. "I want the truth. Who is he?" So I told him. Everything. The desperation. The plan. John. The affair that wasn't really an affair but a transaction disguised as connection. The lies built on lies until I couldn't see the bottom anymore. When I finished, David sat in silence for so long I thought he might never speak again. "Do you love him?" he finally asked. The question surprised me. "What?" "This farmer. This John. Do you love him?" "No," I said, and realized it was true and false at the same time. I didn't love him the way David meant. But I'd felt something with John that I'd never felt with David. Something real. Something honest. Something that wasn't about money or status or family expectations. David nodded slowly. "Samuel is my son," he said, and my heart lurched with hope before he continued. "Legally, biologically irrelevant. I've raised him for 7 months. I've loved him every single day. I won't let you take that from me. I'm not trying to—" "Here's what's going to happen," David interrupted, his businessman voice emerging. "You're going to leave. Tonight. I'll give you a settlement. Generous. Because despite everything, I'm not cruel. But Samuel stays with me. He grows up as my son, my heir. You disappear from our lives. You can't take my baby. I can, and I will. The alternative is, I release this investigation to my mother, to my lawyers, to the press. Your reputation will be destroyed. You'll be lucky if you keep anything at all. But if you leave quietly, you'll be comfortable. You can start over somewhere else. It's more than you deserve. I looked at this man I'd married, this stranger wearing my husband's face, and I saw that he meant every word. I need time to think, I whispered. You have until tomorrow morning, he said. Pack your things, say goodbye to Samuel, and go. That night, I held my son for what might be the last time. He slept peacefully in my arms, unaware that his mother was about to become a ghost in his story. I memorized his face, every tiny feature, every small sound he made. I whispered apologies he'd never remember and promises I'd never be able to keep. Then I made a decision that surprised even me. I called John. He answered on the third ring, his voice heavy with sleep. Hello? It's Grace, I said. I need to see you, please. It's important. We met at an all-night diner on the highway, the kind of place where nobody asks questions. John looked older than I remembered, more worn. Or maybe I was just seeing him clearly for the first time. I didn't expect to hear from you, he said, sliding into the booth across from me. I know. I'm sorry. For everything. What's this about, Grace? Why now, after all this time? So I told him the truth I should have told him months ago. About Samuel, about David's discovery, about the choice I'd been given and the choice I was about to make. John's face went through a dozen emotions, shock, anger, confusion, and finally, something that looked like wonder. I have a son? He whispered. Yes. And you never told me. No. He was quiet for a long time, staring at his coffee like it held answers. What do you want from me, Grace? I don't know, I admitted. Maybe I just needed you to know the truth. Maybe I needed to apologize for using you. Maybe I'm hoping you'll tell me I'm not the terrible person I feel like. You are terrible, he said, but not unkindly. You used me. You lied to everyone. You created a life based on deception. I know. But you were also desperate and scared and trapped in a life that was killing you slowly. He reached across the table and took my hand. I was angry when you ended things. I felt like you'd thrown me away. But I also knew you were struggling with something bigger than what we had. Tears I'd been holding back finally fell. I'm so sorry, John. What are you going to do? I don't know. David wants me to leave. Give up Samuel. Start over. And what do you want? Nobody had asked me that in years. What did I want? Not what David wanted, or his mother, or society. What did Grace want? I want my son, I said. But I don't want to destroy his life to keep him. David can give him everything. Security, education, opportunity. I can give him love. But is that enough? John squeezed my hand. My mother used to say that love is the only thing that's always enough. Everything else is just decoration. I smiled through my tears. Your mother sounds wise. She was. She died last month. Oh, John, I'm so sorry. Don't be. She died knowing I'd finally kissed a beautiful woman who saw me as more than just a farmer. He smiled sadly. Even if it was all a lie. It wasn't all a lie, I said, and meant it. The way you made me feel, that was real. You reminded me I was a person, not just a wife or a failure or a disappointment. We sat in silence, holding hands across a sticky diner table at 3 a.m, two people who'd briefly touched each other's lives and created something neither of us planned for. What if, John said slowly, you didn't have to choose? What if there was another way? What do you mean? David wants you gone, but he wants to keep Samuel. I want to know my son, but I can't offer him the life David can. You want to be a mother, but you're trapped by choices you made. What if we all got something we needed? I'm listening. You leave, like David wants. But not far, just far enough. You stay in Samuel's life as, I don't know, a family friend, an aunt, something. You get to watch him grow up. David gets to be the father he wants to be, without the shame of everyone knowing the truth. And me? He paused. I go back to my simple life, knowing somewhere out there is a piece of me growing up safe and loved. That's not fair to you, I said. You deserve to know your son. Life isn't about what's fair, Grace. It's about what's possible. And this seems possible. I thought about his words all night, turning them over like stones in my hand, looking for sharp edges that might cut us later. But the more I examined the idea, the more sense it made. Not perfect sense. Nothing about this situation could ever be perfect. But possible sense. Survivable sense. The next morning, I went back to David with a proposal. He was in the nursery when I found him, standing over Samuel's crib with his hands gripping the railing like it was the only thing keeping him upright. He didn't turn when I entered, but his shoulders tensed. I'll leave, I said without preamble. I'll take your settlement and move to the other side of the city. I won't fight you for custody or try to expose the truth. But I have one condition. You're not exactly in a position to make demands, David said, his voice flat. I'm not demanding. I'm asking. Please. Something in my tone made him turn. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. This was destroying him too, I realized. Not just me. What do you want? I want to stay in Samuel's life. Not as his mother, I understand I've lost that right, but as someone who cares about him. A godmother, maybe. A family friend. Someone who can visit on birthdays and holidays. Someone who gets to watch him grow up, even from a distance. David was quiet for a long moment, studying my face like he was trying to read a foreign language. Why? He finally asked. Why not just disappear completely? Start fresh somewhere new? Because he's my son, I said simply. I made terrible choices, David. I hurt you in ways I can never undo. But I love Samuel. That part was never a lie. And I think maybe the punishment for what I did shouldn't be losing him completely. That seems like it would hurt him more than it would hurt me. You should have thought about that before, David said, but there was less venom in his voice now, just tiredness. You're right. I should have. But I didn't, and now we're here. And I'm asking you to show me the mercy I probably don't deserve. David looked back at Samuel, who was starting to stir, making the small noises that meant he'd wake soon wanting breakfast. He deserves better than both of us, David said quietly. Yes, he does. But he's stuck with us, so maybe we can try to be better. For him. Another long silence. Then, fine, you can be his godmother. But there are rules. You don't tell him the truth, ever. You don't confuse him or try to undermine me. You don't bring that farmer into his life. You show up when invited, you leave when asked, and you remember that I'm his father. Legally, emotionally, in every way that matters. Are we clear? Crystal clear. And Grace? He turned to face me fully now. If you break any of these rules, if you do anything that hurts him or puts his stability at risk, I will destroy you. Not because I'm cruel, but because I love him that much. Do you understand? I understand. Samuel started crying then, and we both moved toward him at the same time before stopping, unsure of whose place it was to comfort him. David gestured for me to go ahead, and I picked up my son, feeling his small body mold against mine in that perfect way babies have. Hey, little love, I whispered into his soft hair. Everything's going to be okay, I promise. It was probably a lie. But it was the kind of lie that parents tell their children to help them feel safe in an uncertain world. And maybe, I thought, if I told it enough times, it might become true. I moved out 3 days later. David gave me enough money to buy a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood across town. Not wealthy, but comfortable. Enough to live without working, though I knew I'd need to find something to do with my days or go crazy thinking about everything I'd lost. The first few months were the hardest. I'd wake up reaching for Samuel, forgetting for a blessed moment that he wasn't there. Then reality would crash back, and I'd spend the rest of the day moving through routines that felt meaningless. But slowly, painfully, I built something resembling a life. I started volunteering at a women's shelter, helping mothers who were running from bad situations with their children in tow. I didn't tell them my story. I wasn't looking for confession or absolution. But I understood their desperation in ways that other volunteers couldn't. I knew what it felt like to be trapped, to see only bad options, to make choices that haunt you. David kept his word about letting me see Samuel. Once a month at first, then gradually more often as he saw that I wasn't going to cause problems. I brought toys and books. I sat on the floor and played trucks. I watched Samuel grow from a baby into a toddler into a bright, curious little boy who called me Auntie Grace and hugged me when I arrived and waved goodbye when I left. It hurt. God, it hurt. But it was better than nothing. David remarried when Samuel was 3. Her name was Joy, and she was everything I hadn't been: patient, gentle, content with her role. She was good to Samuel, which was all that mattered. The first time I saw them together, Samuel calling her Mama and her responding with easy affection, I had to excuse myself to cry in the bathroom. But later, when I'd pulled myself together, I thanked her. For what? She asked, confused. For loving him, for being what he needs. She studied me with sharp eyes. David told me about you, about what happened. My stomach dropped. He did? Not everything. Just that you and he couldn't make it work, and that the divorce was complicated. But I can see it's more than that. I can see it in how you look at Samuel. Like you're memorizing him. I'm just his godmother, I said carefully. Sure, Joy said, but her tone suggested she didn't believe me. Well, godmother or whatever you are, you're important to him. He asks about you between visits. So whatever happened between you and David, I'm glad you're still in his life. I wanted to hug her. I wanted to tell her the truth. I wanted to warn her that being married to David Ben came with costs that weren't immediately visible. But I just smiled and said, "Thank you for understanding." John and I crossed paths occasionally over the years, never planned. The city wasn't that small. But sometimes I'd see him at the market where he still delivered vegetables, or walking past a cafe where I was having coffee. We'd exchange small nods, careful smiles, the acknowledgement of two people who shared a secret too big to discuss. Once, when Samuel was 4, John was at the park where I'd taken Samuel to play. We both froze when we saw each other, and I watched John's eyes track to the little boy climbing on the jungle gym with fierce concentration. Is that, he started to ask, but I shook my head slightly. Just someone I'm babysitting, I lied. John looked at Samuel for a long moment, taking in his features, his movements, maybe looking for pieces of himself. Then he nodded slowly and walked away without another word. I almost called after him, almost invited him to stay, to meet his son properly, to have the relationship he'd been denied. But I remembered David's warning and my promise, and I let John disappear back into his own life. Some sacrifices, I was learning, had to be permanent to mean anything. Samuel grew. 5 became 6, became 7. He started school, made friends, developed interests. He loved science and hated broccoli. He wanted to be an astronaut on Mondays and a veterinarian on Thursdays. He was kind to smaller kids and fierce about fairness. He was, in every way that mattered, a good kid. And I got to watch it happen. From the edges, from the margins, from the carefully defined space of Auntie Grace who visits sometimes. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. and something was infinitely better than nothing. Mrs. Ben died when Samuel was 6. The funeral was enormous, filled with business associates and society people who'd known her more by reputation than relationship. I stood in the back, trying to be invisible, but David found me afterward. "She knew," he said without preamble. "What?" "About Samuel. About everything. She figured it out when he was about 2. She never said anything directly, but she knew." "How do you know?" "She told me, near the end. Said that blood wasn't as important as I thought it was. Said Samuel was a Ben because she'd decided he was, and that was the end of it." David's voice cracked slightly. "She said you were braver than she'd given you credit for." I didn't know what to say to that. The woman who'd made my life miserable for years had apparently forgiven me before she died. Or at least understood me. It felt like absolution I hadn't earned. "I miss her," David said suddenly. "She was difficult, but she was my mother. And now she's gone, and Samuel will barely remember her." "He'll remember the stories you tell him," I said. "That's how people stay alive, through stories." David looked at me with something that might have been gratitude, or might have been grief. Then he walked away, leaving me standing among strangers at his mother's funeral, thinking about all the complicated ways we love and fail and keep trying anyway. The years continued their steady march. Samuel turned 8, then 9. He grew tall and lanky, all knees and elbows and questions. He asked me once why I didn't have kids of my own. "I'm not married," I said, which was true. "You could still have kids?" he insisted with the confidence of a child who didn't understand how the world worked. "Maybe," I said. "But then I wouldn't have as much time to spend with you. And you're my favorite person to visit." He beamed at that, and my heart cracked a little more. I dated occasionally over the years, but nothing stuck. How could it? I was a woman with a secret that defined everything about me. Any relationship would require either total honesty, which would expose Samuel, or fundamental dishonesty, which I'd had enough of. So I stayed alone, building a life around the edges of my son's life, learning to be content with scraps of motherhood. On Samuel's 10th birthday, he told me he wanted to be a farmer. "A farmer?" David repeated, clearly horrified. "Samuel, you can be anything. A doctor, a lawyer, take over the business." "I want to be a farmer," Samuel insisted. "I want to grow food and work with my hands and make things that help people. What's wrong with that?" David looked at me like this was somehow my fault, but I just shrugged. How could I tell him that blood sometimes calls to blood in ways we can't explain? That maybe somewhere deep in Samuel's DNA was his biological father's love of soil and seeds and growing things? "There's nothing wrong with it," I told Samuel. "Farmers are important. They feed the world." "Exactly," Samuel said, vindicated. Later, David pulled me aside. "You didn't tell him anything, did you? About, you know." "Of course not. I promised." "Then why—" "Sometimes kids just develop their own interests, David. It doesn't have to mean anything." But we both knew it might mean everything. I thought about finding John, telling him that his son had somehow inherited his dreams despite never meeting him. But I didn't. Some knowledge would only cause pain, and we'd all had enough of that. Samuel is 12 now. He's starting to look less like a boy and more like a young man. He's starting to ask harder questions about his family, about relationships, about why his Auntie Grace never married or had kids of her own. I answer carefully, truthfully when I can, deflecting when I must. It's a delicate dance, this maintaining of lies that protect him while trying to be authentic enough that he trusts me. Last week, he asked me if I'd ever been in love. "Once," I said, which was true in its own complicated way. "It didn't work out." "Why not?" "Because sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes there are too many complications, too many things that get in the way." "That's sad," Samuel said, with the simple honesty of someone who hasn't yet learned that most adult truths are sad. "It is," I agreed. But it's also okay. I have a good life. I have people I care about. I have you. I'm glad you're my godmother, he said, and I had to turn away so he wouldn't see me crying. Me too, kiddo. Me too. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe Samuel will learn the truth someday. Maybe he'll hate me for the deception. Or maybe he'll understand the impossible position I was in. Maybe he'll want to meet John. Or maybe he'll decide that David is his only father in every way that matters. I can't control any of that. All I can control is showing up, being present, loving him as much as I'm allowed to from my carefully maintained distance. It's not the motherhood I imagined when I first got pregnant. It's not the happily ever after that stories promise. But it's real. And it's mine. And I've learned to find grace in the margins of other people's lives. Because here's what I've learned in these 12 years of partial motherhood and permanent guilt. Love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Sometimes it's messy and complicated and built on foundations of mistakes. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is love someone enough to let them believe a beautiful lie. Sometimes redemption isn't about fixing what you broke, but about staying present in the aftermath and doing the best you can with the pieces that remain. I'm not the villain I thought I was when I seduced John all those years ago, but I'm not the hero either. I'm just a woman who made desperate choices and has spent a decade trying to minimize the damage while holding on to whatever connection I could. Samuel is thriving. That's what matters. He's loved by David, by Joy, by me, by a whole community of people who want good things for him. He's safe and happy and growing into someone who cares about making the world better. And if sometimes I lie awake at night wondering what would have happened if I'd made different choices, well, that's my burden to carry. Not his. That's what mothers do, right? Carry the weight so their children can fly. Even if those children will never know that's what you're doing. Even if you're only allowed to be their mother in secret. Even if love has to hide behind titles like godmother and family friend. It's still love. And love, I've finally learned, is always enough. Even when it has to be a secret. Even when it breaks your heart. Even when it costs you everything. Especially then. So that's my story. The story of how I became a mother by breaking every rule and how I'm learning to live with the consequences every single day. If you're listening to this and judging me, I understand. I judge myself too. Every morning when I wake up. Every time I see Samuel and have to pretend I'm just his godmother. Every time I remember John's kind face and how I used his goodness for my own desperate plans. But I also want you to understand something. Desperation doesn't excuse what I did, but it explains it. When you're drowning, you don't think about who you might pull down with you. You just grab onto anything that floats. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not even sure I deserve it. What I'm asking for is understanding. Understanding that sometimes good people make terrible choices. That sometimes love and lies get tangled up together until you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. That sometimes the right thing and the easy thing are nowhere near each other. Samuel is 12 now, and every year that passes, I wonder if this will be the year he figures it out. The year he looks at me and sees the truth written in my eyes. The year everything I've built comes crashing down. Maybe that day will come. Maybe it won't. All I can do is keep showing up, keep loving him from my assigned distance, and hope that when he's old enough to understand, he'll see that everything I did, the good and the terrible, came from a place of wanting him to exist in this world. Because here's the truth that keeps me going. I'd do it all again. Not because I'm proud of my choices, but because the alternative is a world without Samuel in it. And I can't imagine that world anymore. I won't. So to everyone listening who's ever felt trapped, who's ever made choices they regret, who's ever loved someone so much it scared them, I see you. Your story might be different from mine, but the feelings underneath are probably the same. Fear, hope, love, desperation, the belief that somehow, some way, It will all work out. And maybe it will. Maybe it won't. But we keep going anyway, because that's what humans do. We mess up. We try to fix it. We live with what can't be fixed. And we love the people we're allowed to love in whatever ways we're allowed to love them. That's my truth. Messy, complicated, and imperfect. Just like life. If this story touched you, made you think, or made you feel something, anything, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Share your thoughts, your own experiences with impossible choices, or just let me know you were here, listening to my truth. And remember, we're all just doing our best with the cards we've been dealt. Sometimes our best isn't pretty, but it's real. And real is all we've got. Thank you for listening to my story, for not turning away, for seeing me, even in my worst moments. Until next time, this is Grace, reminding you that love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Sometimes it looks like sacrifice. Sometimes it looks like secrets. Sometimes it looks like standing at a distance, loving someone with everything you have, knowing they'll never fully know the truth. But it's still love. And love is always, always worth fighting for. Dear friends, what you just saw is only one part of the bigger picture. In the next video, I'll reveal the twist no one saw coming, so make sure you're here when it drops. I would love to know what you would have done in this situation. Drop your thoughts below. I'll be reading every single comment. Thank you so much for watching. I love you so much, and don't forget to give this video a like, hit the subscribe button, and share with someone who needs to hear it.